Welcome to Transformational Pathways, a podcast created by Toastmasters District 46 in the greater New York area, where we share conversations from influencers within the Toastmasters community and people whose lives have positively transformed by walking down the Toastmasters path. Whether you're just getting started in your career, have had recent career changes, or you're navigating different languages, we're here to help you build confidence by discovering new tools, overcoming your fears to find your voice, and engaging in a thriving community. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of Toastmasters District 46's podcast, Transformational Pathways. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and walking the pathway with me today is our guest, Osama Tawi. Osama, you are a recent graduate of NYU's Stern School of Business with an MBA in General Management. Congrats! You have been a Toastmaster for years, and as of the date of this recording, you're the PR manager for the district and a member of 6 clubs. However, you were just elected to be the club growth director for the entire district starting in July. Double congrats, Osama, and welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Scott. Thank you for having me, and what an introduction that was. Thanks.
Well, we might as well roll out the red carpet and just start everything with a bang, right? Don't want to keep them bored.
Sounds good.
All right. So, are you from New York? I'm not detecting a New York City accent there.
I'm not sure if you can detect it, but my English isn't the best. So I am not originally from New York. I was born in a small town in Iowa, and I grew up in also a small town in Oklahoma. And I lived there until I was 10 years old, and then my whole family moved back to Saudi Arabia. That's where my parents are from. And I moved with them, and I lived there for the majority of my adult life. And I moved back to New York. Well, no, not back. I moved to New York when just like 5 years ago, back into the 2016. So, nope, I'm not a true New Yorker, if you may.
Well, actually, if you're from somewhere else, you're a true New Yorker. One of the interesting things about Toastmasters in New York City is that, and particularly with regard to this podcast, I don't think any of the guests who have been Toastmasters in New York City have actually been from this city. And I'm not from the city myself. So I think that goes to the true diversity of New York, and it's part of the core as to what this city is. Was your family originally then, are you saying, from Saudi Arabia?
Yes, that's correct. Both my parents were born in Saudi Arabia. They lived the majority of their lives there. They lived in the States where they had me. They lived around 10 years. And that was it. My dad was just doing his master's and his PhD here. And then when he finished, he moved back to Saudi Arabia.
Mm. What was it like growing up in the Midwest? Was it, especially not necessarily being from the Midwest? Did your family speak English at home, or what was the deal there?
Well, I mean, the Midwest is very different from New York, that's for sure. But no, actually, my parents only spoke in Arabic inside the house. And my first language was also Arabic until I had to go to school and I went to first grade, and that's where I learned English or picked it up from my friends at school. But generally speaking, English is my second language. And of course, my dad, because he was studying here, he speaks English. But my mom didn't speak English. I had 2 younger siblings. None of them really learned the language until later on in their school when they hit like I think it was 7th grade or 8th grade. That's where they started learning English, but they had no background. I was the only one that was a little advanced, even though I feel like whenever I moved back to Saudi Arabia, because I didn't really practice English that much, I kind of lost it a little bit, and therefore you can detect an accent that I don't speak in a very American accent so far.
Fascinating. So literally the first time you spoke English was when you started school.
That is correct.
What was that like? Did you literally just walk in there knowing nothing? How did you communicate with anyone? How did you even begin to pick up English? Were the teachers at least warned in advance?
Yeah, so the teachers were warned in advance. I had one of my friends that also spoke Arabic in class with me, and I usually just spoke to him. But, eventually you get to mingle, you get to network. I'm a networker from a very young age, and eventually you pick it up and you start learning. I remember one of my relatives, a very old member in my family, used to ask me, like, so how did you learn English? Like, did anybody teach you? And I was like, no. I just put some Arabic and a few letters of English and I mix them up, and then voila, there's an English word. And he used to lie. I was 6 or 7 at the time, so I guess that's how I saw it in my mind. But to him, it was just so hilarious. So.
Now, I've got to ask, I grew up in the Midwest. I lived several places in the Midwest, including in Oklahoma. Were there many other kids from Saudi Arabia around?
Actually, so the small town that we lived in was a university city, so it did have some sort of diversity, but it wasn't that much. So we knew like 6 or 7 other Saudi families, some other Arab nationals that we also like had this community. We spoke to each other in the same language. But when you go to a class, I remember 2nd grade, 3rd grade, I was the only one that spoke Arabic. I remember I had there wasn't much diversity, and at the end of the day, it was the 80s, and it was the Midwest. I remember I had there was this black friend, an Asian friend, but yeah, the majority of the class was white Caucasian. So I did stand out in a way that I didn't really want to when I was at that age.
Yeah, how did you adjust to that?
It was a challenge. It was the adjustment. I think when I was young, mostly had to do with how I dealt with my classmates, how my relationship with my teachers were, how I tried to forgot about it. I think I like when I hit 3rd grade, I just thought I was another white kid. Just everything was normal. I think it was I wasn't that different.
But then all of a sudden you were leaving the U.S.
Yes. By the time I finished 3rd grade, my parents told me that our stay in the States had to come to an end and we were moving back. And I was kind of excited, to go back to Saudi Arabia, or not go back because I never lived there really at that point. I felt like, oh yeah, that's where my parents are from. That's where I'm from. I'm going to go back. And as soon as we got there, it was a huge challenge because, the 2 countries are totally different. And it was an adjustment, to say the least. But even when I went there, it was just so I had to adjust to so many things that people would sometimes look at me and say, "You're the American, right?" And I look exactly like everybody else there. Like I'm like, no, I'm one of you guys. I'm like those guys. Like we're different. We're the same. And they're like, "Yeah, you're American." Nope. So it was a little tough.
Well, talk to us a little bit about what these adjustments were around. Paint a picture for us. help us imagine what it was like being a kid who was basically American at this point, suddenly being in a country with a completely different culture, completely different history, having learned English, suddenly having to, I assume, set that aside. Tell us. We got to know.
Oh, definitely. It was definitely a challenge. I remember I spoke the language, so that part was a little easy. But whenever there's something that had to do with just general habits in general, like I remember I used to go to school carrying a lunchbox because that's what happened. That's what we did here in the States. But in Saudi Arabia, nobody does that. Like your mom might give you a sandwich, you put it in your backpack, and if it gets squashed with your books or whatever, you just have to deal with it. It's just how things are. And if the majority of people don't even get their lunch or their breakfast or whatever food they take from home, they actually go and buy it from. It was different on so many different levels, and I felt like I'm out of place a lot of times, which kind of made me question, was I Saudi or was I American? Or I was having this identity crisis that I didn't really know where I fit, because when I was in America, I didn't look like them, and then when I moved to Saudi, I felt like, I look like them, but I don't act like them. It's totally different. And I lived with that kind of divisiveness for a while until eventually I started, just so I can fit in with the community around me, I started hating my American side and trying to abandon it and stay away from it as much as possible. So people would ask me like, "Oh, you're the American?" I'm like, "No, I'm 100% Saudi. Both my parents are Saudi. I'm from this country. I hate America." And it was just like so aggressive. And then thankfully when I went to college, I kind of reached that equilibrium, that balance of yes, I am Saudi and yes, I am American. And how does that fit into my life is something I try to work on. But I stopped being ashamed of who I am, whether it was Saudi or American. It was a balance.
That is a genuinely interesting journey, particularly from an American point of view. And I would love to hear more about that. But before we go there, and we will, let's talk a little bit about the Saudi educational system. Was it similar to the United States'? Was it totally different? What was it like being a student there? And were there other big cultural differences that you had to get used to day to day?
Oh, it was definitely.
Just imagine
a
it's a totally different world we're stepping into.
Of course, the whole educational system is totally different. The only thing that they have in common is it's 12 years of school. But other than that, it's completely different. First of all, the language is different. I remember everything I learned up to third grade. Like I went back to Saudi knowing how to write in cursive, and that for me was like, wow, I'm so advanced. And then I go there and they're like, well, you're not going to write in that language to begin with. We're going to start something totally different. My reading was very poor in Arabic. My writing was very poor. I had to learn all that from scratch. And I remember my dad put me in a private school when I first started, because I needed the extra attention just to pick up where everybody already is. And it was such a challenge. And then, to go from there, like history, of course, they don't teach us the American history. They teach us the Saudi history. Geography is the same. When you go into like the different topics of literature and social studies. It's totally, almost everything I studied in the first 3 years was almost to no value of me when I went into the Saudi system. And the other thing is the teacher-student relationship in Saudi was very different than American. In America, they kind of nurture and they take care of the students, and they try as much as possible to make them feel that they're, they belong and they're loved, and they have their best interest in heart. In Saudi, well, most of the Arab world, it's not like that at all. It's like they kind of tell you, you have to study for your own benefit. If you don't want, it's up to you. But whatever comes here is, we are going to test you. We're going to see if you're worthy enough, if you're good enough, and if you're not, you're going to be punished. And you might drop out of school, and a lot of people do. And it's just a different, until recently, a teacher hitting a student for discipline is something totally acceptable. And I went from, our teachers giving us hugs in school and telling us good morning, boys and girls, to, teachers to telling us give me your hand, let me hit you on your hand, or whip you. And I was like, this feels more like prison than it feels like school. So that was totally different.
I just have to say, I can't let one thing that you just said slide.
Oh yeah.
Did you literally
saying.
Mean that people got whipped in school? Okay, I'll remember that next time I hear about a kid being naughty in school. So let's talk about how you began to develop this sense of desire to distance yourself from your previous American identity. Of course, you felt like an outsider, but what, did people tease you in school? Did they make fun of you? How and why did you decide to have this mindset shift? And was it because of anything aggressive that was happening to you, or was it more an internal?
Well, I think
just feeling like an outsider.
Kids kind of bully those who are different than them, and I definitely look different. My skin was the same as theirs, but the way I dress and the way I act and the way I speak was totally different, and therefore I was bullied a lot when I first started, and that kind of pushed me into an area where I really wanted to fit in, and I think I never really left that place until today. I really want to fit in wherever I go. But back then, I to fit in, I had to be like them, and I had to speak like them, and I had to act like them. And that included, a little aggression. I had to be aggressive with others, and I had to, say some bad words, which I grew up not being allowed to say any bad words. I had to fight a little bit. I had to denounce anything Western, anything that comes from the West, and that includes, of course, America. Until to the extent that sometimes I would be, I reached the level where I would, deny any involvement of any connection of mine to the United States or to the Western world. And I would sometimes, somebody would tell me oh yeah, you're American, you can fit your American head into that. That's amazing. You can really understand what we're saying. And then I would get really mad. I'm like, I'm not American. It's I have no connection there. I am just like you. And it kind of just so I can fit, and I'm not bullied. I kind of went that route. But along the way, I remember when I went to high school, and then even afterwards when I went to college, when I reached that balance of who I am and where do I belong, here or there, and eventually I told myself I don't have to belong anywhere. I can be unique. I can be in between here and there. It's fine. Don't have to belong to some place in particular. And that's where I really started, feeling more comfortable of being myself and talking about myself and just living my life normally. And I remember there was this time that I was proud of being Saudi and American. I did not really think much about it. And then when I was 21 years old, 9/11 happened. And I remember a few of my friends would come up to me like, oh yeah, America got attacked. You guys were effed so hard. And this is, you guys had it coming and you mingle with so many countries. And now, you got what you had. And I would stand up to them and say, you know what? It's not right what you're saying. You shouldn't, face hate with hate. And as much as it sucks, but 3,000 people lost their lives that day. You shouldn't gloat in that. You shouldn't look at it this way. You should look at it in a different way. Like, yes, it was a crisis. This was something bad happening. So, and most of my friends would look at me and like, wow, that's we never really looked at it that way. It's totally different. Well, we were 20-something-year-olds back then, but I at that moment I kind of felt like, you know what, I'm talking to Saudis, defending America, or like talking about both cultures, and I feel comfortable with it. And that's where I felt like, oh yeah, I reached the level I really want to live my life as. It was definitely a big thing. Well, first of all, Laden. By the way, he has the same first name as I do. I that's not something that has nothing to do with me. But he was originally Saudi. He lived most of his life in Saudi before he was exiled. I mean, a lot of what was going on in different countries around Saudi Arabia, like Afghanistan or Iraq or any of that, was like we heard about it, we saw its effects. So yeah, it was a big thing. It was obviously not as big as what happened in the United States, but it was a big thing that, I mean, the whole world was watching, and Saudi in particular were watching closely as well.
Once you embraced the duality of your identity, how did you move forward, and how did people react? It sounds like you might have had some interesting discussions with them, but over time, did the circles that you were in embrace it, or was that something that was a constant struggle for you, or what was that like, embracing that?
It was, I think I felt it was I lived a normal life, and I lived that in a very normal way that I wasn't really reminded of it, except for instance, when, I don't know, we go, for instance, my friends and I go to a restaurant and the waiter doesn't speak Arabic, so somebody has to speak to them in English, and I jump in and just, start talking. Everybody would look at me like, wow, like, your English is very good. Like, where did that come from? Or sometimes they would, like, all these things, the small things that here and there that would, come up that remind me of like, oh yeah, okay, I'm a little different than the people around me, but I feel that it was a normal thing. I think the biggest thing it really affected me is looking at things in different perspectives. You don't have to look at it from only one perspective. Like, you look at something and somebody else is saying something totally different, exactly the opposite of what you are, and then it gave me this ability of trying to hold things from down the middle, to like hold the stick from down the middle, instead of just sticking to one opinion or one thought. And I try to implement that in my life with my friends and others at work, that some people might have a different thought, and that came from my double identity, if you may. that, some things you go to Saudi, it just makes a lot of sense. You come back to the States, it does not make any sense at all. So, you can't say it's wrong. You just say, it doesn't work for them. It works for them. And that's all you can say.
After you finished school, what happened next?
Well, I finished school. Of course, I went to college. It was a different city than when my parents were living in, but it was still inside Saudi Arabia. And the reason, well, several reasons, but the main reason is college is free. So in Saudi Arabia, so that was definitely go there. And I studied industrial engineering, and halfway, I wouldn't even say halfway, towards the end of my studies, I discovered I just didn't like it. I didn't like engineering. I loved the concepts that we learn of how we design things and how we analyze and all that, but I just was not very comfortable at being an engineer, working in an engineering capacity or an engineering position. So one of the things I did when I first graduated is, thankfully, even before I graduated, I secured a job in the biggest retailer in Saudi Arabia. It's called Panda, and it's like the Walmart of the Middle East. And I was able to, I was accepted in a program called Management Trainee, where they employ people with potential that can become, store managers in like a period of 8 years or something like that. But they start from scratch, from being like the person that puts stuff in the bag, stocking the shelves, starting from scratch, and they give you the training how to become a supervisor, a section manager, a department head until you are like a store manager. And it was a lot of fun at the beginning. And first of all, one of the biggest reasons why I got that job is English, because in that industry you have like 20 or 30 different nationalities, and so you have to have one language to connect them all, and English was that language. So that really helped me in getting that job. And I worked in the stores or in operations for about 3 years until I got promoted to a different job outside of operations, but in the same company, where I worked as a commercial buyer, and then from buyer went into category management, and then so like the progression kept on going, but the fields were different. But I was really enjoying my time there, especially when it comes to like analyzing sales and analyzing the results that we have and going deep into the numbers. And numbers are my favorite thing to do. I love to look at numbers and analyze and come up with trends and predict the future and all that. So, it's just very enjoyable. And then from there, I out of commercial, because I was working with a lot of suppliers that sold to Panda, and I was a buyer and a category manager. I transitioned into a role of marketing, which I ended up even loving even more. But it wasn't in Panda. It was in a company called Procter & Gamble. It's a multinational company, and I felt like I really needed that multinational element to it, because it really helps you to get to understand what the best practices were and what was really going on. I know a lot of people that don't like to work for big corporations because they feel like they're so greedy and everything is like there's a system for everything. You don't really learn. But I go the exact opposite route. I love working in corporations that are big, because they have a lot of experience. And I think when I joined P&G, they were, at that time, they were like 175 years old. So it was a very old organization, and they had a lot of great practices that I go into and I understand, like, why do we do it this way and not that way? And everything is set in a system, but asking the right questions really can make you understand a little bit more of what's going on exactly, and makes you even understand what is possible and what is not possible in that kind of environment. And it just blew my mind, and I enjoyed working there. And even when I was working there, I mean, it's a long story, but a friend of mine came up to me with the idea of, opening our own business. And I just loved it because, I kind of have the entrepreneurial spirit. And what I was bringing to the table is this analysis and numbers. I had no interest in whatever the business was. I was just in it for the numbers. But I had just learning the systems and everything in a huge corporation kind of made me say, okay, now I know what goes on behind the scenes. I can have my own business, and that's how I transitioned into it.
And it is interesting. I also made a transition from large organizational life into entrepreneurialism. On the one hand, that large organizational life did give me an understanding of systems, of the full range of possibilities that an organization can have as it grows and scales. And it made me very much used to the idea of a growth-oriented mindset with a company that I ultimately ended up running. But at the same time, I'll fess up, there were some big differences. There were some shocks. Talk to us about the small business that you ran and whether you experienced any of those shocks or speed bumps, or was it all just smooth sailing and you never had a problem at all?
You will never find an entrepreneur that tells you it was smooth sailing, no problems at all. That's like one of the impossibilities in life. No, so my friend came up to me and he said, I have this idea about opening a bakery. I had no idea what baking was, what it's about, what it entails, nothing at all. He brought in the concept. I brought in my expertise in sales and in marketing and analysis and customer service. And we had, of course, another partner that did, the finances, the money, and all that part of the business. And when we first started, we sat down together. We were like, okay, what is everybody bringing to the table? How much can you contribute financially? How much can you contribute with your time and with your expertise? And then from there, it went forward. We hit so many different bumps on the road, to the extent sometimes we were like, should we quit while we're still ahead? I remember in the beginning we almost spent nothing or something very negligible. And then we were always like, should we stop? And it was that kind of attitude didn't really push us in the right direction, because every time we hit a bump, it's a question. And eventually we went forward with it. We opened up the shop. Of course, it took a lot of, I took care of the designs, the design part of everything inside the restaurant, interior designs, actual design, the design of the logo and the paperwork and the menu and all these different elements, like the packagings, and I felt like I really enjoyed doing all that, even though everybody like the rest of the partners were telling me, oh, this is too much money that we're spending. We can't do this. And I keep telling them, well, it's for the experience. When you want somebody to walk into your shop, the shop was a Turkish bakery. So we want them to walk in and feel that they are in Turkey. And that's why everything that we did in the internal design and the packaging and everything was meant to make people feel that way. And we were successful in that. But there's always this trade-off. Should we spend too much money to make them feel it, or they wouldn't really care. So why should we make them feel it? And maybe we shouldn't spend as much and just spend it somewhere else. And there was this struggle of which is the right direction. And we made so many mistakes. I'm not saying it was fine, but at the end of the day, we really enjoyed our time together, and we enjoyed doing what we do best. And some of my partners would be interested in marketing. They would be like, wait, why are you doing this and not that? And then I explain it to them. They're like, oh, okay, we understand now. Like, we had no idea what marketing is before. And I also learned a lot in terms of finances and accounting. Why are we doing this? Why do we care about the cost of the food as much as we care about what's sold? All these things. And I really got into baking from that. I started loving the concept of baking. I remember when I moved to New York, I kind of had this longing of, oh my God, I haven't baked in a while. Let me do something and transition that into American pies and doing different things. And I really enjoyed it. And I never thought that I would get into that kind of mentality of bake. I don't even know how to cook. Why should I even bake? But it got me into it, and I loved it. I enjoyed it.
Osama, do you have a specialty now that you bake?
Well, I make a mean pecan pie. So the next time I see you, remind me to bring you a slice.
I was going to say, maybe you should just come over to my house for Thanksgiving. Bring a few. Oh, I better not put that on the air. You might get thousands of Thanksgiving invitations the day or two after this airs. How long did you do that, Osama? And is it different running a business in Saudi as opposed to in the U.S., or is that one of those experiences that you think is pretty much universal?
I mean, the concept is pretty much universal, but it's a different ball game when it comes to different regulations, different licenses, what you're allowed and what you're not allowed, and the timeline that you work with until you open, or the type of customer service that you give. There are significant differences between the two countries, but the main concept of you're providing a service and the product is kind of universal. Everybody does it. But I remember the whole project, me and my partners worked for a little less than 5 years ever since we started. But the actual runtime for the bakery itself until we eventually sold it was around 2 years. But it took us some time just to prepare for everything until we opened them up.
Yeah, and that's a tough and scary time, huh?
Definitely, yeah.
So what was your next step after that bakery got sold?
Well, at the time, my wife at the time got a scholarship in New York. And of course, New York was one of my favorite cities in the world. She actually got accepted to 2 different programs. One of them was in Seattle, Washington. The other one was in New York. And I kind of pushed her, influenced her, just choose the one in New York. Because that's the best city on the world. And eventually that's what she chose. And she moved to New York. I think it was 2015. Or was it? Yeah, I think it was 2015. And I tried to relocate with P&G because they had an office in New York, and their headquarters was in Cincinnati, Ohio. But they had different offices around the world, and I tried to relocate with them so that I can be with my wife at the time. And it just didn't work. I mean, I tried so hard, and I was, still working at the time, but it was so difficult because of this family split situation. And I eventually ended up just resigning and moving to New York so I can be there with my wife. And like a few months later, we well, it was like more like a year later that we sold the business. But it was it was, you know, a challenging time, because that was, for me, that was the sole income that I was getting, and that source was, you know, when you sell it, then you really have to do something with your life. And that's where I, you know, kind of invested my time and my efforts into getting an MBA, so, you know, I can learn from that and then gradually go back into employment. Now, you know, I got my MBA from NYU Stern, but, you know, with COVID and everything, I haven't yet made the transition into full-time employment, but hopefully that comes in soon. So I'm hopeful for the future.
Well, and let's keep it real. You don't graduate from NYU Stern School with an MBA and end up handling. It just doesn't happen. It's one of the top schools in the United States, particularly in that field. So the modesty is appreciated, but let's have a little bit of a reality check there. That's quite an accomplishment. Now, let me ask you this. Did you literally fly into New York City, step foot off that plane, and immediately walk into Toastmasters? How on earth did you get involved with this organization? Osama, tell us.
Okay, so here's what happened in terms of Toastmasters. I actually started my Toastmasters journey when I was still in Saudi Arabia back in 2011. And I was, you know, kind of pushed into different roles. First of all, let me tell you how I joined Toastmasters the first time. I remember I had to take my car to be serviced at the car shop, and I was wondering if one of my friends can pick me up. And we had a nice gathering that night, so I called one of my friends and told him, "Hey, you know, I have this mechanic that I'm going to after work to drop my car. Can you pick me up? And then we have a gathering with our friends together at that night, and then it's close from your house. Can you, you know, pick me up on your way?" And he told me I can, but on one condition. And I was like, "What is it?" And he said, "There's this thing that I go to every 2 weeks. It's called Toastmasters, and you have to come with me, and then we can go to our friends." And I was like, "Whatever masters it is, fine. I'm just gonna, yeah, sure." And he took me there, and of course, like, thinking about Toastmasters or just toast, I thought, you know, they're gonna serve us some bread or something. And I walked into that room, and I was astonished with like how everybody is well dressed and presented, and everybody and the whole meeting was so official. I just loved it. And then as soon as that finished, my friend was like, "Okay, so should we go to our friends?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, we still have that," because I kind of like forgot everything else. And we ended up going to our friends, and I couldn't shut up about it. I was like, "Oh my God, guys, have you ever heard of Toastmasters? Like, it's amazing." And I eventually got some of them to attend the meetings. But I remember I never missed a meeting afterwards, and I kept on going. The funny part is my friend who introduced me to the club didn't show up afterwards. He got busy, he was traveling, and then he just lost interest. But the good thing that he did was he introduced me to it, and I just got into it right away. I started delivering speeches, and then even like before I finished my first year, they were like, "We have an empty position in the officers. Like, we need a treasurer. Can you do that?" And then the year after that, I was elected as vice president of education. The year after that, I was the president, just like less than 3 years into Toastmasters. And I was like, wow, I just enjoyed it a lot. And then I remember when I moved to New York, you know, I left my family back there, all my siblings, all my friends. I left my job. I left everything back there. And the only thing that was constant in my life throughout that whole experience was Toastmasters. So when I moved there, just 3 days after I moved, I found a club that was like a few blocks away from me that meet on a Saturday morning. And I sent them an email, can I, come as a guest? And they were like, oh yes, most welcome. And I went there, and as soon as I went into the club and saw people rehearsing their speeches on the side, and everybody's like, oh my God, we still need this role to be filled, and we still need to do that. And I felt like, oh my God, this chaos that comes before the meeting is my world. I love it. It's like I'm home. And I just continued being a Toastmaster here in New York.
First of all, in this case, for those who are listening, take a few seconds if you can, watch the video version of this, because you have got to see the smile on Osama's face as he talks about this. It is worth watching the whole thing. And there you go again, Osama. That joy, I'm sure they will feel it when they hear it, but to look at your face, I'm just bursting even looking at it. Let's talk a little bit about that Saudi Toastmasters Club. What was the name of that amazing place?
Oh, that club was called Nisma Holding Toastmasters Club. It was sponsored by a company named Nisma Holding, but it was a community club. Anybody could join, and it kind of lifted the financial burden from the club, and it gave them the opportunity to go into the whole community and recruit whoever they wanted, and it really worked. For me, it was just amazing, and for everybody that came after me, it was just phenomenal.
Do you remember your icebreaker?
Of course I do.
Tell all.
All right, so I think when I first started, they gave me a mentor who was this American guy in his late 60s at the time, and he sent me this very long email of what I should do, what I shouldn't do, and then followed it up with a phone call saying just trying to energize me more on delivering my icebreaker. And I told him, okay, I can talk about whatever. I have a lot of things to talk about. Help me just to narrow that down. And he told me the club needs to know you. So you need to talk about something personal to you, something that tells us who Osama is. Give us something. And I was like, okay, well, recently I lost a lot of weight, and that was a big accomplishment that I had there. He's like, great, talk about that. And I was like, okay. So I went up and I delivered the speech. Of course, I wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it, and I kept on going and rehearsed it in front of the mirror a million times, and rehearsed it to my siblings, and then I talked to everybody this is a speech that's coming, and it was 4 to 6 minutes, but I wanted it to be really good because the quality of the club I went to was very high, and I didn't really want to feel remember when I said I try as much as I can to fit in? This was me trying to fit in again. So I really put in a lot of emphasis on it, and I went up and I started by saying, my name is Osama Tawi, and recently I lost 32 kilograms. How did I do it? Let me tell you. And then I said, fellow Toastmasters and most honorable guests, and then right into it, what motivated me and how it started. It was. I still remember it until today.
What's the name of that American club that you joined that was a few blocks from your house?
Oh, that club was called Queen's Best Toastmasters.
One of the things that you hinted at when you were talking about it a few minutes ago, that is, in my opinion at least, one of the most beautiful things about Toastmasters. And I'd be curious to know whether it's a beautiful thing for you too, and if so, how you experience it, is that sense of community, that sense of connection that can happen in a club. Has it been that way for you?
Definitely. I think even in that first club that I ever joined, it felt like a community. It felt like we used to have this outing that we do once a year, and everybody comes. Everybody brings their, a family member, a partner, a spouse, a sibling, kids, and it's like a family day out that everybody meets, and when we kind of really connect on a personal level, even though from our speeches we already are connecting on a personal level because we share our personal information and personal stories, but still, and some other times we have like an intermission. Well, in that club we always had an intermission in the middle, and we mingle with each other and we talk to each other, and there's always like a small reception in the beginning before we start, and then afterwards when it's all done. So we always like kind of connect, but that once a year full day of fun with the family is really gave us this sense of community that we like until today. That group, we still talk to each other, and I remember even like with COVID and all that, we kind of gathered together, even though like we're all in different cities now in different places, but we gathered. We said, you know what, let's do a Zoom call to connect. And some of us haven't talked to others in like 6 or 7 years, from the like, and it was like 10 years ago when we first joined. But we had a blast out of it. We really felt like, it's coming back together. And then eventually we had another call and another, and it felt like, we're still connected. We have this connection together that we enjoy. And it's not just that club. It's like in general, the best Christmas parties I've ever attended were the Toastmasters club's Christmas parties that they have, in December, during a regular meeting or something. And it's always very entertaining and very enjoyable. And that's mainly because there is this sense of community that connects us all together. I mean, we all have one purpose, which is, to improve ourselves and grow together. And that really, connects us together and gives us like this common theme that we all have. And that's why I think community is something huge in Toastmasters. I definitely agree.
What would you say is the biggest change that Toastmasters has brought into your life?
Well, I would say the leadership aspect. When I first joined Toastmasters, it was mainly for communication. I loved how speeches are done. I always wanted to get on stage and really speak and do that as a professional and do it very well. But the leadership aspect is something I did not anticipate. I did not really think that I would ever go into that track. And the reason is, I joined Toastmasters and I finished my CC in, I forgot what it was, like 9 or 10 months.
What is a CC?
It's like, I was like, CC is it's 10 speeches. And it was, well, in my opinion, the best way to start any communication track, even though, Pathways, the new program, has its perks and has a lot of good advantages. But those speeches were just like so dear to my heart that I still remember each and every one of them. And when I finished that and I didn't really think about anything else, I went into advanced speeches. Even when they asked me, like, can you be the vice president of education? I was like, am not really interested, but sure, maybe I can do that. And unexpectedly, I went into it, and I have taken up all officer roles in a club. I mean, like vice president of education, I've already done like 5 or 6 times. President, I've done 3 times so far, and then the list keeps going on and on. And then from there, I was an area director. I took up an area director just because I needed the district officer role so I can finish my DTM. But I kind of fell in love with being a leader and leading people and helping them and taking them from point A to point B. And it's just something I never imagined doing, because I've always had the idea that a leader is just like a manager, but he is not. He's totally different. And that's why I think I fell in love with, like, how can you really manage or lead people in a nonprofit? There's no financial advantage, and you just have to influence people yourself. And then I kept on going, area director, then division director, and then public relations manager, and then starting this coming July 2021, club growth director, which is something huge. I never thought I would go into that, but that's like the 3rd biggest position in the district. It's just crazy.
You talk about the way that leadership and influence come together in a Toastmasters context. As someone that worked for a large company for many years, actually 2 large companies, and someone who just got his MBA, what do you think that Toastmasters has to offer someone who is in business, who's beginning their career maybe right after they just got their MBA?
That's a good question, because when I started Toastmasters back in Saudi Arabia, the majority of members were young. And you'd find the majority of them were like 35 or younger, or let's say even like in their 20s, the majority of them. And that's why you find a lot of clubs that were started inside universities. When I moved to New York, it was like totally different. It was more experienced people, more older people that are, at a point in their careers where they need to improve their communication or their leadership to go into a better position or to transition to a new industry or something like that, or retired folks that need to fill their time with something that they would benefit from. And different people go into Toastmasters for different reasons. That's totally fine. But I was surprised that younger generations aren't really looking into Toastmasters here in New York. And I think the reason is they don't really understand the concept itself or how it benefits them. So, and I've seen a lot of people that are just graduated from college and they join, and I like that's like a unicorn right there. I'm like, hey, so what brought you here? And they keep telling us either their professors ask them to go and explore what Toastmasters is and then come back as like their communications professor or something, or they tell us a friend of mine tried it out and he really loved it and he really benefited from it and recommended me to join. And I think both of them kind of give us the idea of what influence we should use to help these younger generations really join Toastmasters. Of course, you're not gonna point a gun at them and tell them you have to join or else. Influence is a lot easier. Even though buying a gun isn't hard at all, but I'm saying it's you can really just show them what they're gonna get. And I know a lot of people that think that, you know what, I'll just learn that with time. I'm just gonna focus right now on what I studied from college and implement that into my work, and that's what's gonna get me to a better place and advance my career. But it's they usually hit a wall, and they're like, oh, I don't know why I did the same work as this person did, but they got promoted and I didn't. It's probably because they just like that guy. And with time, they discover it wasn't that they liked that guy. It was that other guy really knew how to advertise himself and really knew how to sell his knowledge and his work through, better communication and better representation. And then when they find that, or they understand that, I think that's the biggest influence that we can have on them. Just like show them their why, tell them why they should join, and then take it from there.
And I've got to say, Toastmasters who are watching this or listening to it, take that talking point and let's share that with folks that we think might benefit from being a Toastmaster. Because that selling element, that is professionally huge. And I don't think people truly appreciate it, which is why your new role, by the way, Osama, as Club Growth Director is so important. Explain to us who don't know anything about anything. What is a Club Growth Director? And what's your vision for that new job? What are you going to do once you start it?
Well, when I first joined Toastmasters, the same job was called Lieutenant Governor of Marketing. And that, that name kind of went away, 6 years ago or something. And it became Club Growth Director. It has the same job, it's just a different way of approaching it. Either you think about it as how to market Toastmasters, or you think about it as after your market, how you're going to get more members and more clubs. And that's where the term Club Growth Director comes from, because you have to have growth in a district. You have to keep growing the number of you have and the number of members you have. And that's why, our district used to be, New York, Long Island, Westchester, and Jersey, or North Jersey. And then it split because it just became so big. And then we were just New York and vicinities, which is Westchester and Long Island. And then even that became big, and recently we split. And that's why you need to keep on growing. And the way to do that is to both grow in terms of membership and to grow in terms of how many clubs do we have now, and we have to increase that. So that's mainly my job right now, is to market for the district or for the organization, and grow in terms of members and in terms of clubs.
As we close out our conversation, I have a couple of last-minute questions for you. First of all, what are the names of the clubs that you're a member of that you haven't mentioned so far?
All right. There's a lot of clubs. All right. So
let's give them a shout out.
So first of all, I am a member of True Potential Toastmasters, as in Queens. I'm also a member in Upstandards Toastmasters. That's also in Queens. I am a member and the current president of Humorous Toastmasters. And I am a member and a co-founder of a cool English club called Diwan Shai, which means tea house in Arabic. And I am also a member of Virtual Parliamentarians, where we learn how to have the right parliamentary procedures in place.
I've got to say this. You and I also were co-members of a club for a little while. Is that not correct?
That is.
What club was that?
That club was Roosevelt Island Toastmasters, one of the best clubs I joined, and I really enjoyed my time. and I felt like family as soon as I joined. For some reason, it was just amazing. I would have continued, but I was at the as a public relations manager. I just had too much on my plate. I couldn't go on any further. I did a few clubs, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you for reminding me of those great days.
Hey, we loved you. Let me ask you, final question, and it's a two-parter. What is a leader, or who, I should say, is a leader that you admire? Who is a speaker that you admire, and why?
Wow. Okay. Leader I admire is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the name. His name is Samuel Longhorn Clemens, or is most famously known by his Mark Twain. And the reason is Mark Twain, of course, he was born in the 1800s, back when the life expectancy was between 30 and 40 years old. But Mark Twain lived 75 years, and he was married. So like everything, all the stress that comes with marriage, he endured as well. But the reason I feel like he has these great quotes. Every time I hear one, I'm like, wow, like how does this guy come up with all this? And he really, I really felt that he was just a lost art. I remember one of his quotes that really changed my life was, age is an issue of mind over matter. If you don't mind, does it matter? It's like, it's just amazing. Like I stopped paying attention to what my age is, and I just, just started living my life. It's totally fine. And I feel that is a great leader. That if he was today if he was living in our age, he would definitely be a Toastmaster. He would definitely do a great job there. As for speaker, there are a few speakers that you listen to that I was really influenced by, and I think the majority of the speakers that come to mind are politicians. So the first one would be President Obama. Really love, even though he has a lot of ahs. I mean, throughout his speeches, it is like, well, thank you. That is a good. And it's like, but in terms of like voice fluctuation and emphasis and all that is something I really love and really take notes from every time. I'm like, oh yeah, I want to do it the Obama way. And I think the other politician that comes to mind is a Saudi politician named Adel Jubair, and he was the for Saudi Arabia for a number of years, and he speaks is just so elegant and so confident, and it just really, when you listen to him, you really feel that this guy really has a message that he really wants to, and it comes across exactly the way he wants it. So these are my best top two speakers that I have on my night.
Love it. Osama, this has been a really fun interview, and it's been great having you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story and your thoughts. For those of you listening or watching, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review or a comment. Also, do not forget to follow District 46 on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And if you're new to Toastmasters, check out Toastmasters46.org. That's Toastmasters46.org to learn more about us or visit one of our clubs. Toastmasters is where leaders are made.
Thank you so much for joining us on Transformational Pathways. If you enjoyed today's episode or got anything out of it, please rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're interested in learning more about Toastmasters District 46, check out the link in the show notes below.